4 weeks ago, an ITV documentary broadcast allegations that one of this country's best-known TV stars, a man of the people, a friend of royalty, a devout Catholic who comforted the sick, was a child abuser. And he'd been allowed to get away with it, unchecked, for 50 years.
How did one man calm the entire society?
Since being exposed, more than 200 people have claimed they were Savile's victims. Now, finally, their stories are being heard.
It is a bloody tragedy that this has happened when he's died. All this should have come out way before his death. But these girls are left with that legacy, and who's going to pay for that?
The NHS, the Home Office and local authorities may all face legal action for failing to protect Savile's many young victims.
It's growing by the minute. Initially it was a few and now they're coming in all the time and they're from the variety of different organisations.
But no organisation is under more fire than the one that made Jimmy Savile a star, the BBC.
Jimmy Savile's victims have faced years of pain. We owe it to them and to our audiences to understand how this could have happened and to make sure that everything we do ensures that nothing like this could ever happen again.
This is the worst crisis that I can remember in my nearly 50 years at the BBC.
Tonight, Panorama asks just how much BBC staff really knew about Savile's abuse.
After they had gone, he indicated to me in a nudge-nudge, wink-wink sort of way that he had just had sex with them. I didn't believe him.
And reveals the inside story of why a BBC investigation that could have exposed Savile almost a year ago was spiked instead.
We weren't asked to find more evidence or anything like that. We weren't asked to get more people on camera. We were told to stop working on the story.
It raises questions for the very top of the corporation.
You know, ever since the decision was taken to shelve our story, I've not been happy with public statements made by the BBC. I think they're very misleading about the nature of the investigation we were doing.
That's me. It's the only surviving photograph of me that I know of.
On November the 14th last year, Karen Ward did an interview with the BBC's Newsnight programme. In doing so, she became the first person to talk on camera about being abused by Jimmy Savile.
He wanted me to do things for him. He wanted me to fondle him. He asked me for oral sex, and I didn't want to. And he promised me that if I gave him oral sex, that he would arrange for me and my friends to go to Television Centre and be on his television show.
This interview has never been broadcast by the BBC before.
Well, I was 14. Of course I wanted to go to Television Centre. I didn't want to give him oral sex because I thought it was disgusting, but I did it.
Off camera, the investigation team had managed to speak to 4 more women who said that as girls, they too had been sexually abused by Jimmy Savile. Karen was ill with cancer when she filmed her interview with Liz McKean.
It was a very big step for her, but she'd obviously steeled herself to do it. And the thing that motivated her was that she was so angry at everything that was being devoted to holding Jimmy Savile up as this wonderful figure, and she'd known what had happened to her, she'd known what had happened to a lot of other girls.
Karen's interview contained serious allegations, not just about Savile, but of abuse on BBC premises by other celebrities. Again, this was backed up off camera by others.
Okay, Gary Glitter was one example. He was particularly horrible and only interested in getting as much sex as he could possibly get from any girl. I can remember seeing him having sex with one of the girls from Duncroft in Jimmy Savile's dressing room, which was packed with lots of people.
Was Jimmy Savile there?
Yeah.
He'd have known what was going on.
Oh yes, he laughed about it. He thought it was funny.
But the BBC chose not to reveal what Karen had to say. The investigation was dropped for what the corporation says were editorial reasons. Instead, just a few weeks later, the BBC broadcast this.
Let's pay tribute to the extraordinary, unique, and never ever to be forgotten host, the one and only Sir Jimmy Savile.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all you guys and girls. Welcome indeed to Jim'll Fix It. Now then.
This special Jim'll Fix It tribute, put out on Boxing Day, attracted 5 million viewers.
This, in all truthfulness, is just a fraction of the mail that we get.
There was also a Radio 2 eulogy, followed shortly after by 2 more BBC TV tributes.
He was a pop pioneer.
How about that then?
Some of Savile's former colleagues knew there was another side that wasn't being shown.
It was pretty vomit-inducing that the BBC was running tributes to Jimmy Savile when he had died, and I could only marvel that the program-making decisions were obviously in the hands of a younger generation who didn't really understand the severity of what had happened.
To me, it just meant that, yet again, I hadn't been believed. But I've spent my whole life not being believed.
Today, Karen Ward, now recovering from surgery to remove her cancer, still feels angry about the decision to drop the Newsnight investigation.
It was hurtful and it was difficult because I had been pushed so hard to do it when I didn't want to. And you have to remember, I wasn't very well at all. I had cancer. In the end, I said, okay. And for all that stress, that's what made me angry. The fact that I'd gone through all that stress when I really needed to concentrate on getting well. And then they never used it because somebody higher up didn't believe me.
Newsnight's decision to drop the investigation was called into question by a few newspapers soon after. But the whole issue really exploded into controversy just weeks ago when ITV chose to run the story the BBC had shelved. The documentary built on key evidence originally gathered by Newsnight. Savile's abuse victims were finally given a voice on ITV. The reporter was Mark Williams-Thomas, a former police officer who'd previously been involved in the dropped Newsnight investigation.
He'd had a big background in child protection, and we were using him really as an expert witness to just evaluate the testimonies that we had. And certainly he had seen everything we had, and he thought it was very strong.
When exposure was broadcast, the impact was immediate. It engulfed local authorities, the NHS, the Home Office, but especially the BBC.
And what has deepened the revulsion is that this happened at the BBC, an institution so loved and trusted it's known as Auntie. This has cast a stain on the BBC.
As new victims came forward, the corporation was accused of turning a blind eye and covering up Savile's abuse, both now and in the past.
These are serious issues, really serious, for which the Director General...
9 days after ITV's film, the BBC's Director General announced 2 inquiries. One into Savile's behaviour at the BBC over 4 decades, the other whether there were any management failings in the canning of Newsnight's Savile investigation.
Despite our efforts to make clear our belief that the decision to drop the Newsnight investigation was taken properly, for sound editorial reasons, people have continued to speculate. This is damaging to the BBC and is a cloud of suspicion which cannot be allowed to continue.
I think there are serious questions about the handling of this matter recently, and particularly the fact that Newsnight appeared to be uncovering evidence to suggest that this was happening, and yet that it was decided not to pursue that report.
I only knew that there was a Newsnight investigation. I didn't have any details about it.
The dropping of the Newsnight investigation has also raised doubts over the leadership of the new BBC Director General, George Entwistle.
You're happy with your role in this, are you?
I'm entirely convinced that I've done all the right things, yeah.
The allegation here, or the charge here, is not that a bad editorial decision was made. The charge is that a film that was ready to go, and don't believe that's the case, was pulled, killed, completely eradicated because of pressure from the top on account of the Savile tributes. Now, that's the allegation, and that, as far as I can establish, is simply not true.
The unmasking of one of Britain's most prolific sexual offenders begins here in Surrey. In the 1970s, Duncroft was a Home Office-approved school for girls.
It was a very strange place, and it was filled with celebrities coming along, film stars, all sorts of people, minor royalty, very, very strange.
Newsnight producer Marion Jones visited regularly as a child. His aunt was the head. Another regular visitor, often driving his Rolls-Royce convertible, was Jimmy Savile.
On one occasion I saw him taking out some of the girls, and my parents would question with my aunt whether this was really appropriate.
Did you think it was unusual?
Everything about that place seemed very odd to me. It was sort of later on, I suppose, that I started to wonder whether there was something else going on.
All the girls at Duncroft were deemed to be emotionally disturbed. For some at first, Savile seemed almost like a saviour.
Jimmy Savile would turn up and suddenly brighten or give the impression that he was going to change something for you. He was going to give you hope. You know, you were worth something because this famous guy would come and see you.
But it became clear what Savile's intentions actually were: sexual abuse.
After a while, the girls would wonder why he bothered coming. And then, of course, everybody knew why he would come, because he would be leching after all these pretty young girls who were so vulnerable.
Karen Ward was one of those. Savile would take her and others out in his car and abuse them. It has haunted Karen ever since.
I'm so full of self-disgust, I can't believe that I did such things. I can't believe that I allowed such things to happen, that I didn't immediately rush and scream it from the rooftops. Make this stop. Just make it stop. But I didn't. None of us did. I just carried on. Lulled into a kind of false sense of that's how these things have to be. That's what we're for.
It was only when Savile died at the age of 84 that his past would finally start to catch up with him. Newsnight producer Marion Jones went straight to his editor with the idea.
Jimmy Savile died on the 29th of October, a Saturday. I pitched it on a Monday morning. The victims, as far as we could tell, would be very vulnerable, people who would not stand up in a libel court. So it was only when he died that it really became feasible.
Marion had already seen that Karen Ward had published on the internet an account of sexual abuse at Duncroft by a man called J.S. He contacted Karen and she agreed to be interviewed. The team tracked down other women who said they had been abused by Savile when they were at Duncroft.
We'd found Karen Ward very credible, but that interview on its own was not going to make this story. And it was the collection of testimonies from the other women as well, those who didn't want to go on the record, but were very happy for us to use quotes and gave us detailed quotes of their experiences. They were all telling the same story.